Welcome to Forum 360, and thank you for tuning in to Fusion, your PBS channel. Bringing you a global outlook with a local view, Forum 360 is generously sponsored by the Knight and GAR Foundations. I'm Stephanie York, your host today. Today we will be talking with two of the multi-partner Reimagining the Civic Commons project and focusing on the transformation of Akron Summit Lake. Reimagining the Civic Commons is a national initiative that seeks to counter economic and social fragmentation in cities by revitalizing and connecting public spaces such as parks, plazas, trails, and libraries to bring people together from different backgrounds. With me today is Dan Rice, President and CEO of the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition, and Lisa King, Executive Director of Summit Metro Parks. We will be exploring the successful and ongoing transformation of Summit Lake, reimagining it, if you will, as a community gathering place where local residents and trail users throughout the region can participate in bicycle and canoe sharing, community gardens, and cultural programming, bringing the community back outside for education, play, and friendship. Let's learn more. Welcome, Dan and Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to start off with each of you telling me a little bit about yourselves, your background, and how you ended up doing what you're doing as head of your organizations. So Lisa, you can kick it off.
Sure. Well, I'm a landscape architect by training. So I grew up in Canton, I went to Columbus for school, and then from there I went to Florida for a couple years. So learned quite a lot about plant material and landscape design, which is everything outside of the building walls. So I have an interesting look at the world based on my training. So started with the Metro Parks some 20 years ago on staff as a landscape architect. Moved up the ranks just a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, as the chief of planning, and then threw my hat in the ring for the director's job. So what I bring to that is completely different than previous directors. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a unique thing. So that's kind of what I brought to RCC as well.
Very good. And Dan?
Well, like Lisa, I've been with the organization for 25 years. We both started when we were 12. That's why we look so young,
right.
Actually. But it's been a real labor of love, to be perfectly honest with you, to be able to work on a legacy type project like this that was started by Congressman Ralph Regula. That's a legacy also of Congressman John Seiberling with the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And so the Ohio and Erie Canalway is a 101-mile multi-use recreational trail. It's also promoting resource conservation, conservation of natural areas, preservation of historic structures. And my background is I'm a historian, actually. I have my undergraduate and my master's degree in history. I was an intern at the Summit County Historical Society. I was actually a volunteer for this organization. And so they reached the point where they needed a staff person, so that was 25 years ago, and I've been here ever since, and it's just been a real honor and privilege to be able to work on this project.
You must have been one heck of a volunteer.
Well, I was the only one to raise my hand, put it that way.
Sometimes that's all you need, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so can one of you, I don't care who takes the question, explain what Reimagining the Civic Commons, and you guys call it RCC, I believe. What is it, and how are your organizations involved? So just a general overview, and then we'll find out how your organizations
You actually, by the way, did an excellent job of explaining Reimagining Civic Commons. And for us here in Akron, it was really building off a previous project we were working with the Knight Foundation. That's called the iTowpath Project, in which the Knight Foundation approached us about ways in which we can enhance and activate the towpath trail along a 3-mile corridor between Summit Lake and downtown Akron. Because what we've recognized is that this is a very urban space that's different than other sections of the towpath trail versus the Cuyahoga Valley National Park or maybe some of the other park areas that Summit Metro Parks manages. And people were really trying to get through these spaces as quickly as possible. They weren't lingering. They weren't having random conversations with residents or strangers. And so we did a series of activations really quickly, put up murals, archways, interpretations, landscaping, to try to encourage people to get off their bicycle or pause. And so then when the Knight Foundation approached us about this Reimagining Civic Commons project, it was really a natural extension of the iTowpath project. But it was really on a much larger scale. And as you said, it's initiated by 4 national funders plus our local funders of GAR and the Akron Community Foundation. The 4 national funders, Knight, Kresge, Rockefeller, and JPB, and most of these funders are outside of Akron, although the Knight Foundation, as you know, heavily invests in Akron. They have looked at our public spaces across the country, and our communities have become much more segregated by race and income. We don't have these great gathering spaces. Similar actually here to Hudson, where you have a green, where everybody kind of just comes together, just randomly. Maybe they're walking the dog, maybe they're out for health and wellness, maybe they're actually having, you know, a personal issue at work or home. And so we don't have these spaces where you get different social economic mixing, where you have a different income, you have different education, a different experience and background. And so what they challenged us is, how can we create these great civic common spaces where everybody can come together and have those random experiences? Because we recognize when we spend time with people who don't look like us, don't have the same income, don't have the same education as us, we then understand each other's perspective much better. In today's society where we're much more polarized, both politically and in other perspectives, now more than ever, we need these spaces to come together. And so we were asked to Lisa's point earlier, throw our hat in the ring. And Akron did. And we competed against about 12 other cities. And we were very blessed and fortunate to be selected along with 4 other cities to be the test pilot over a 3-year period. So Akron, Chicago, Detroit, and Memphis. Philadelphia was another city that was actually a pioneer in this field. And so the common denominator amongst Philadelphia, Memphis, and Detroit and Chicago is their population is 800,000 and higher, up to 6 million. We're the only city at 200,000. And so we're really having a tremendous opportunity. And as Lisa referred to previously, there really are 4 pillars that we're focusing on. 1, social economic mixing. How can we get different folks from different backgrounds to come together and spend time together? How can we create value creation, possibly some job opportunities? How can we promote environmental stewardship? And again, it's the same corridor between Summit Lake, Park East, and downtown Akron. And most importantly, how can we really engage our community residents? Because the funders don't really care what Lisa and I think. They care what the residents think.
Right.
They care about these spaces. Why do you spend time in these spaces? Why don't you spend time in these spaces? And we spend a significant amount of time building relationships with our community residents.
Wow.
I know.
You took like the next 8 questions, right? So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about actually Summit Lake, but first, what are the other, you touched on 2 other local projects that are part of this RCC, Reimagining the Civic Commons, and do you two have, both of you have roles in those other 2 projects?
So the areas that we kind of presented in order to get the project, to win the project, there is the downtown Cascade Plaza. So looking at how do we activate that space, and then it's kind of strung together to Park East via the towpath.
Okay.
Through there to Summit Lake, you know, and then the towpath really it's like a string of pearls. So we've got these 3 areas that we were concentrating on, as well as the towpath itself. How do we make it engaging and find ways to move people along through the spaces? So that's kind of it's 4 mini projects that are meant to work together. Did I explain that the
Absolutely.
way you would?
Yeah, and what I failed to explain previously is that our organization serves as a convener for the project.
Okay.
We are the grant recipient, and we receive the funds and we manage the funds. And over a 3-year period, we've received $5 million to be matched by $5 million. The way we implemented the project is through our partners. Summit Metro Parks, Downtown Akron Partnership, Akron Civic Theater, Students with the Goal. We have over 20 different partners, City of Akron, helping us to implement the project because we can't do it ourselves.
And is that where the ideas come from? These 20 other groups like coming together and
yes and
generating
no,
these ideas?
Because, and it's a good question, because the question we ask ourselves is how might we encourage people to spend time in these spaces? And so we ask them in each of these spaces. We asked the how might we in downtown Akron, we asked the how might we in Park East, how might we in Summit Lake. The answers that we got back was, so the how might we in downtown Akron was how might we get people to spend time in Locks 2, 3, and 4 in Cascade Plaza. But the feedback we got back was, I don't feel comfortable spending time in the spaces. I don't feel safe. It's not that it's any less safe in downtown Akron, it's because there aren't any people there. So then how might we create some activity so people feel more comfortable? In Park East, the feedback we got was, I feel like 2.5 million hikers and bicyclists are going through my neighborhood, and the hikers and bicyclists feel like I'm going through somebody's neighborhood. So ironically enough, they both feel the same way. So how might we, again, create some great spaces for activation where those folks can come together? The how might we at Summit Lake was, how might we encourage people to interact with the lake? Well, the feedback we got was the residents did not look at the lake as an asset, they looked at the lake as a liability. And the other it was incredibly revealing to us because we think, oh, it's a great lake.
It's a beautiful lake.
Exactly. You would assume everybody likes it. But the way I describe this project is almost like peeling back the layers of an onion. Just when you think you understand it, there's another layer to peel back. So if you think about it this way, Summit Lake has been cut off both physically, psychologically, and emotionally. It's cut off because of the highway system, the rail line, the schools were taken away. So it's no wonder people feel abandoned. And so one of the layers that we peel back, to be perfectly transparent with everybody, is trust. There's a legacy of things being done to and not with the residents over decades. And so to be perfectly transparent with you, Lisa and I go in these meetings, they don't know us. Why should they trust us?
Right.
You know, we've heard this before. We've had some things promised to us, not delivered. Why should we believe you?
Right.
There's a racial issue. I'm a white middle-aged guy, you know, coming in. You know, they don't know me. And so we probably spent the first 16 months to 2 years just developing relationships and building trust. I think we've started to make progress on that, but we have to continue to have a presence there, because if not, it's going to be transactional.
Has Summit Lake always been cut off like that, or was it a time that it was in its glory? Like, and what did that look like? Did you know?
Well, the history of it is much different than the reality of it today. So years ago, back in the 30s and 40s, it was, we've seen it called the $1 Million Playground. Really? And it's just that there were, you know, amenities there and a different economic situation, you know, to Summit Lake at that point. So there was a large swimming pool and like a
roller coaster, Ferris wheel.
Really?
Yeah, so it was completely different than it is now. So it's got some very rich, very unique history. But, you know, based on industry coming and going, things have changed over the decades. So
was the expressway built around it? Was that not there back then? Or
the expressway was not there.
Right.
Okay.
And if you look back at the history of our transportation system, it basically was built through neighborhoods that, you know, the neighbors maybe didn't have a voice in it. And it literally, so the same thing with State Route 59. It has cut off all those inner city neighborhoods so they literally feel disconnected. And to Lisa's point, Summit Lake was a destination. And it was open to swimming in 1916.
Wow.
In 1917, it closed to swimming because of industrial pollution and open sewers.
Wow.
And so you have this perception of it being, it was a great place to spend time with your family, and that, although it probably wasn't socioeconomic mixing because it was probably only for one race, and that would be white residents. And so we're battling that. But that's why Summit Metro Parks is such a critical partner. We could not do our work without their engagement because they're the natural resource experts. And so we, you know, I talked to Lisa, said, Lisa, would you be interested in being involved with this project? And they've done a fantastic job of fulfilling the expectations of the residents. Number one comment we heard from residents is we want a place to sit, talk, and have a grill. Number one comment. So what did they do? They developed
we gave them.
Good.
Yeah.
places to sit, talk, and have a grill.
Well, in nature, for the most part, around it is free.
That's right.
You can go out and enjoy nature, and to have it where you feel safe and comfortable and some activities, which we'll get into in a minute, is what is wonderful. Because it doesn't matter what socioeconomic background you have, everybody can enjoy that. I want to remind our viewers and those who may have joined late that we are here with Dan Rice, President and CEO of the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition, and Lisa King, Executive Director of Summit Metro Parks. And we're talking about reimagining the civic commons, and particularly the incredible transformations occurring at Summit Lake. So, what was the first thing? You put benches in, places for people to sit, and grills, you know, sit, talk, and converse. That started the transformation process. That was the very first thing you did?
Well, I would say, from our perspective, the very first thing we did was listen. Because as Dan said, we spent the better part of a year and a half, maybe even more, going to meetings, meeting residents, continuing to be there and listen. I mean, we sort of took the fly on the wall stance at the very beginning. We wanted to hear everything they had to say. And it was kind of cathartic, I think, for them to tell the stories of what had happened in the past, and they were promised things that didn't happen. And we really took note of all of that. And then at the point where they were used to seeing us, you know, we kind of asked, how is it you would like to use this site? You know, what would you like to do out here? You know, if you had your wish, what would it be? And, you know, to their credit, they were very forthcoming, but they didn't want big, huge things. They wanted community spaces, like Dan said they wanted somewhere they could sit and enjoy each other, that they could do a meal together, they could cook. So we took into account all the things they said, and the things that we heard the most often are the things that really kind of started working into a site plan. So just going through that process with them, we heard what they wanted. We wanted to give them as many things that they wanted that we knew we could do. And so we started building this plan that they had input on. So, in the end, we were able to give them, they wanted a gathering space, and part of Civic Commons is prototyping. So this gathering space, in a prototyping kind of way, was a tent. So we gave them somewhere where they could come together, and the tent is not a permanent structure. In case it didn't work the way they thought, or it wasn't in the right location, it wasn't gonna work where it was, a tent is an easy thing to move and kind of figure out how that's gonna end up. So we gave them a tent, we gave them a new shoreline. Dan had touched on the fact that they weren't thrilled with the lake because we're in a neighborhood of non-swimmers. So they have a lot of fear about the kids walking in or falling in. They also have some very sad history that we wanted to make it a better situation for them. So in talking with them, their immediate reaction was, "Will you please fence the lake?" And we thought, well, why don't we find a way where you can enjoy the lake and still feel safe? We want to accomplish that safety first, and then kind of work our way through the process with everyone.
So what is that solution?
Well, what we did is we gave them a large section of big barn stone, a nice stone edge to the water, so that as you approach, there is no falling in. I mean, you're going to have to take steps down. They're wide enough where you can sit and still not be at the water's edge. You can take 2 steps down and stand and fish. And then I think the important thing that we did, which is kind of a little known fact, is we dumped sand, like forward sand, in at the edge of the water where it meets the stone. So if anybody were to step down, they're only going to be ankle deep. So we put a bunch of sand right at that and spread it out, so that really you can see the water, you can see the bottom through the water. And we thought that added that level of safety. Anybody that walks up, they're like, oh, it's not deep here. So we did that treatment to see how it would go over. And we think that it's been pretty well received. People will sit there and fish, and we've done fishing programs from there. We added some swings that's set back even a little bit further, where they can sit and swing and enjoy the lake. So we wanted to kind of change slowly the way they perceive that lake.
And it's been incredibly impactful because now they have a way to enjoy it in a safe environment, and now they're interacting with the resource. Because prior to their activation, and again, all this is funded by the Reimagining Civic Commons funding.
Okay.
We actually refer to the project as Akron Civic Commons just to make it even simpler. But prior to that, there was only one bench at Summit Lake, and it didn't even face the lake.
Right, it faced away from the lake.
We actually documented people, because we've done part of our work is actually a tremendous amount of research and data collection.
Sure.
We would actually survey people driving to Summit Lake and pulling those little soccer chairs, you're familiar with
Sure,
those,
I got
out of
them in
their
my
trunk
trunk.
and sitting in the parking lot.
Wow.
That's how we kind of felt about how people's experience were.
Wow.
I mean, and something else that Lisa reminded me of is that this is all part of what they call design thinking process, where we went through a lot of training, because the traditional way of actually designing a space would be you would go and hire an engineering firm, a consulting firm, and they'd come back and they'd study it, and then you'd pay them a lot of money. This is the opposite process. You go to the residents and ask them, what do you think? Get their ideas and test things really quickly, knowing you are going to fail. Some things are not going to work, but you want to do it, as our colleagues in Detroit have said, light, quick, and inexpensive.
Wow.
Do it really quickly, do it very lightly, and if it doesn't work, fine, and then iterate. And then watch how people use this space. Fascinating story. Some Metro Parks put picnic tables underneath the umbrellas by the beach area. Do you realize those umbrellas, I mean, not the umbrellas, but the picnic tables literally and figuratively got legs, and they moved throughout the summer. They moved underneath the trees.
Oh, how funny.
So
people wanted under the shade.
Exactly. So what that told us, where we thought the tables should go, was not how the tables were used. And so throughout this entire process, there have been all sorts of experiences like this, both in Lock 2, with design thinking, and it's been incredibly rewarding, because you're really developing relationships and having a meaningful impact. But the residents are really instructing us.
That's great.
More than anything else.
It's a socio-experiment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, co-design brings you something that's going to be far more successful than a design that you impose on a group. So designing with them and prototyping is something that we're using in the park now.
So the item that seems to have gotten the most attention, at least that I have viewed on reading the newspaper and things like that, is the pop-up nature center. and it's won award. Who's deal with it, and how did it come about?
Well, I have brilliant staff, I have to say, and when we hear a good idea, we know it immediately. So when we were down there, we were talking about, as things were just getting going, we were wondering, so where would it be a good place for us to kind of be the base for fishing programs we want to do, and hiking and birding? You know, we really didn't have sort of a place to be, and we had already met and gotten to know the folks at the AMHA, the Reach Center and the Community Center that's connected
right
there. And one of my staff said, I think they have a couple of empty rooms in there. I wonder if they would be willing to lease it to us. And I think we all kind of went, where are you going with this? And she said, well, what about a pop-up nature center? Well, knowing that we have large storage areas in the metro parks of nature items that we switch out in different
exhibits and things like that.
We thought we certainly could populate a room to make a cute little nature center. And from that moment, I mean, the ideas came, and we had the little duck out on the sidewalk that kind of leads you into the, had great clings for the window. We made a little selfie station in there, and just the tables and chairs within that room were readily movable. So we thought this is going to be a good place where we can get started and kind of see how it goes here, because this was a community that didn't really know Summit Metro Parks well. So we thought that we would give it a go and, you know, see if it took off, and it did. So
is it still a pop-up? Is it permanent?
It is still a pop-up.
Is it going to be permanent?
Well, we are working with the city of Akron on a location that's just a little bit up the trail. So we are still doing, you know, a year's lease at a time with the Reach Center, and we're just continuing programs there.
So pop-up doesn't mean like for a week or two?
Well, it started out as maybe a 6-month venture, and now we're in our second year.
That's
so
amazing.
Things take time, and we have just worked with them to see if we could stay.
That's really
I
great.
think the long-term goal is for Summit Metro Parks to have a presence there in the urban landscape, which would be transformational.
It would be amazing,
Indeed.
really. So we've touched on the Nature Center. Can you tell me some other changes that have been made that you've noticed have made a big impact?
At Summit Lake,
Yes.
specifically? I think just being able to serve the community in ways that we didn't think that we could. So when we started there, of course, we started sort of right in our sweet spot, which is anything having to do with nature. So fishing programs, we plan to do some paddling programs, you know, hiking, birding, those kinds of things, bicycling. But the longer we've been there, and we're getting to know the residents and the community there that comes and goes, they have asked for things where sometimes we've been a conduit to bring the right thing to them, and then they can use our pop-up nature center for that day or that program. We're also stretching to do some things that we didn't think we could do. So we're bringing some Zumba, and we're doing some stretching, and we're doing
Right by the lake.
Ballaflex, which is a very popular seated exercise for seniors and others. So anybody of all abilities can do that. So we're training some folks in the neighborhood there that then can build a business with that.
Wow.
And then one of our staff members will also be able to do it. So we're learning some things that we can take throughout the county as well.
Wow,
So
am I going to see you as a Zumba coach someday?
Probably not me, but I will go.
Great, great. And so what's next for Summit Lake? Is there a next?
There is. So we want to build on the year one. And so that was year one, basically what Lisa was referring to with the opening up the beach area, the pop-up nature center, the tent. Year two is actually making that shelter permanent. And so part of our year two funding, we awarded Summit Metro Parks a grant to actually build a shelter. It'll be a permanent shelter. It'll be absolutely spectacular. Hold about, I think, about 40-some people on the inside. It'll have electrical in it, so it'll be an amazing addition to Summit Lake.
People can rent it out too,
yes,
for events.
It'll be very similar to what they have at Hardesty Park.
Wonderful.
But the intention here, though, is to make it available just to the neighborhood residents as possible, because it's one of the things we're very cognizant of is equity. That some of these areas in the city have actually not as much investment as maybe other parts of the city. So we want to be cognizant of that. And again, this is a good example of a collaboration because it's Akron Civic Commons funding, some Metro Parks facilitating, but actually it's City of Akron property. So City of Akron will actually be managing.
Great collaboration.
It really is. And you know, it's a really good example of all of these parties working together. Next phase also, we're actually doing a master plan around the lake. Again, some Metro Parks is facilitating. So to take what we did on one side of the lake, to do all around the lake, possibly a trail around the lake as well. So a whole lot of things are in the works here. There's actually artwork along the trail as well. Some of Shane Wynn's photography That's also in Lock 2.
Shane Wynn is everywhere.
She is. But it also gives people a reason to spend time in the space. Stephanie Leonardi is actually our artist in residence. She actually constructed these oversized Adirondack chairs. They're actually going to be installed at Summit Lake, one in Summit Lake, one in Park East. So a lot of great things coming up here.
Well, I look forward to visiting and trying it all out. Believe it or not, our 26 minutes is up. So today we learned about the national initiative Reimagining the Civic Commons, which consists of projects designed to revitalize and connect public spaces such as parks, plazas, trails, and libraries in order to bring people together from different backgrounds. We talked with Dan Rice and Lisa King about the ongoing and so far very successful transformation of Summit Lake into a community-wide gathering place for education, fun, and friendship. This was a very enlightening and eye-opening discussion that we hope spurs more transformations throughout neighborhoods that you live in.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.